All right. Hello everyone. Welcome. There's only a couple of you here right now, but so I imagine we'll have a couple of folks um, filter in as we get started here. But welcome to tonight's webinar. Tonight we're talking about managing risk at the farmers market. So we'll hear presentations about emergency preparedness, what insurance for farmers markets can look like, and how we handle emergency communications. So, getting us started tonight is Rocky Adams from the Michigan Emergency Management Association to talk to us about just kind of general emergency preparedness. So, I will turn it over to you, Rocky.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you all for being online and having a little bit of a chat today about what we can do to prepare for emergencies at your events. My name is Rocky Adams. I'm the first vice president of MEMA, which is the Michigan Emergency Management Association here in Michigan. I'm with the Berrien County Sheriff's Office. I've been here for 25 years, about 13 or 14 years now as the emergency management coordinator. And during my time here, I've commanded several different units, our hazardous materials response team, our bomb team, as well, and being a crime scene investigator and detective. But a lot of that time was spent about 10 years ago, and now I'm the emergency manager for the county. Just a few things in this presentation that I'm going to go through is talking a little bit about MEMA, what it is, why it can be a really good collaborative um, association here with your association. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the planning resources that might be out there. This is a fairly quick chat, about a half hour or so that we're going to talk about emergency planning. I assure you that there are college credits and courses that can take an entire semester to get through when it comes to planning. So we want to give you some materials in case you're left wondering and wanting a little bit more to get in depth. We'll talk a little bit about some common planning considerations, especially for these types of events where the public is coming to them. And throw a few tips your way, and then a few more suggestions for running a successful event. So the Michigan Emergency Management Association, or MEMA, we're a not-for-profit statewide association made up of emergency managers. Some work within a government sector, some work within the private sector. There are many different industries out there that have emergency managers aside from just the government. And so we've come together. We're a member-driven association, much like yours. We are out there to support and enhance our emergency managers throughout the state of Michigan by giving them basically the support that they need fraternally, to be able to bounce ideas off of each other, to be able to, get advice and mentorship from each other, and to be able to advance different projects throughout the state that help emergency management, and that can even include some legislative affairs that we get into. So a few planning resources that are out there for events. A really good guide that's been out for quite a while. It was updated in 2010, but it really has some really good guidance, and it would be FEMA's Special Events Contingency Plans or planning document. That's paired within a independent study course that people could take, an online course that will walk you through that guide and be able to give you a few uh, just different worksheets that you could go through, checklists, things like that. So the independent study 15B course is what they call it. If you were to Google or search FEMA and independent studies, you'll find all kinds of different emergency management courses that are for free. Anybody can take them. You just go through those at your own pace. This particular one that I'm talking about is numbered 15B, and you'll see their course catalog if you were to ever, search that out. And like I said, there's a companion document for that. It's a manual that then has all the content that the training goes through, but it also is designed to be able to walk you through all kinds of considerations for contingency planning. For this presentation, we've taken a few of the items out there that are most prominent, and that serves as some of the basis for a couple of the things that we're going to be talking about. Another good resource would be your local emergency manager or your local emergency management coordinator. Every county in the state of Michigan is required to have somebody designated as their emergency management coordinator. And they're to really serve that entire county level. There are some communities that are really big when they reach certain population thresholds where cities, townships, and villages can also have a local emergency management coordinator. So you would just have to know in your location who's at what level of jurisdiction do they have a local emergency management coordinator. So certainly you could always start at the county and they can help direct you if there's a city, township, or village coordinator. They're always a good resource to be able to get advice if you're looking for things. Most of them are really piled on when it comes to a lot of uh, special event planning for schools, for their communities. And so there's not an abundance of time that they really have to create plans usually for outside entities, but they certainly could have, a Zoom meeting with you and be able to bounce ideas off of each other and verbally give you the right direction to go. There's also, I think this was from a past presentation that somebody had found a cheat sheet of emergency procedures for your farmers market, a document that was on the web page. I don't know if that I couldn't find it. I don't know if that might be under the member only thing, but if that is something Jenny or any of the staff knows about, throw that in the chat and maybe we can grab that at the end of the presentation to learn more about it. And then the Weather Service has an event ready guide. You can kind of see that in the lower right-hand corner. It's about a 14 or 15 page document that really talks about weather specific considerations for outdoor events. A really great resource that they have. It's open source. You can Google it and pop that right up and put that into your planning repertoire. Um, just to give a little bit of a baseline on threats and how we look at assessing threats for our events. Basically, we're looking at anything that could be natural or man-made that has the potential to harm our event, harm life, put people at risk, or just basically disrupt the event. So anything that could make it go wrong is kind of what we could put into a threat category. And then when we're assessing each of these threats, we really only want to spend, I think, the time and really intense planning on the things that are going to be at the highest risk. And so one way that we assess that would be to look at then the likelihood, which would be the chance of one of those threats happening. You might look at that based on your history. What do you have normally in that area? You may have some common sense things that you kind of throw in there, or you may look at the consequences. What would be of high consequence, even though it might not, be all that likely to happen, and really kind of balance that on how much time that you specifically dive into a particular threat. Otherwise, we typically are building our emergency plans based on an all hazards concept. And what that means is that basically it doesn't matter what the threat is that comes in and ruins it. Our emergency plan can kind of has already given us guidance on what we should do during any emergency, all hazards, and that becomes like our general plan that we go by. When we have things that are of a really high threat, really high likelihood, really high vulnerability, those are the ones that we want to dive into and really have more specific plans for. If it's an outdoor event, for example, a severe thunderstorm would be fairly likely. They happen quite a bit. You look at the weather report and you're going to be able to see that it's coming. That might be something that we want to have a very specific plan for that. So some examples, obviously, I would think that a lot of our threats are probably going to be in around these categories. There's a lot more of them that are out there. If you want, throw a few of your top five threats that you have for your events in the chat. And at the end of it, just compare with some of the other people that are on the line and see where we're at. But a couple of them that I just wanted to pull out for the purposes of this presentation would be severe weather, as mild as a thunderstorm all the way up to a tornado. Um, you could have, flooding events if you're in kind of the maybe low-lying areas of your community. A lot of events like to use river walkways and things like that. Just kind of know what some of the risks are in that area. And I'm not sure if you have a whole lot of events like now going on outdoors in the middle of a blizzard, but that's just to give you something else to think about for any other kind of event, whether it's not a farmer's market event or something else that's going on outdoors. Even if it's indoors, you may have to contend with that going on outdoors. Medical emergencies, fire, now any kind of active violence. It says active shooter up there, but it could be really any kind of weapon where somebody is attacking a soft target is what we would call, meaning usually not a whole lot of hardened, physical controls, security, things like that are guarding our community events that we have, whether it's a parade or a farmer's market. So these are things that we do have to think about, as unpleasant as they might be, and kind of think how we can mitigate those threats. Lost children, or maybe even vulnerable adults, criminal activity. We've had events, I know in our area where, even burglary, robbery, larcenies, where money is stolen. Those are just a few things to maybe consider in your events. Power outages, and really, you get your team together and you start thinking about anything that could disrupt your event, list them out, and those are what your threats are going to be. After we kind of figured out our threats, almost like we've indicated here with the severe thunderstorm up here, and then usually we start taking a look at it and saying, okay, how would it affect the venue itself, the infrastructure that we have? How would it affect the crowd or our customers? How does it affect our staff? And then overall, how can it affect the event in its operations? And then just the basics of risk management is figuring out after we've listed all of the different effects that it could have in these different areas, then we try to figure out how do we want to manage it by either transferring our risk, avoiding it, which would be like cancellation of the event, transfer. Just some examples there might be insurance or, for security, hiring a security company or hiring police department to handle security, transferring that risk to someone else. Just accepting it and saying, hey, it's probably not likely going to happen, and the consequences would be low. So those might be acceptable reasons to accept it, or you want to lessen it, which is usually the most popular, is going to be to try to find some way to reduce your risk, reduce the risk of injury, and try to control all of that. Let's see here. Uh-oh, my annotation stayed on the screen. I might just play it and I just might keep going on that because I forgot how to take them off. Anyway, so some different planning considerations for our event. We want to, look at that venue layout. It's going to be a big difference if it's a outdoor event versus an indoor event. We may have to think about choke points. So with outdoor events, obviously we're going to be a lot more vulnerable to the weather. Indoor events, we've now taken people and put them in a little more of a confined area. If we were to have to evacuate for a fire or things like that, we want to make sure that our um, routes of being able to get out are well marked so that people don't panic and um, not be able to figure out where the exits are or to block those exits, where they think that they might be able to get out a particular way and find out that it's blocked in some way with set asides or things like that that we've put in front of the doors. So there's definitely some different considerations, whether it's indoors or outdoors. And then even if we're indoors, we kind of have to think about if we did have to leave the building, we still have now the outdoors to contend with. So, and that fire alarm, we often have to consider this even for kids at school. Okay, if we're going to do a fire drill, they're going to be standing outdoors for, 15, 20 minutes or something like that. Are we conditioning people to go get their coats or putting them in danger while they're outdoors waiting. So those are just some things to kind of think about in terms of the layout. Temporary structures, um, those are probably not involved at all at any farmer market where we have any tents or anything like that are out there. I'm sure that's very very popular. That vendors often are going to have these temporary structures. If we have wind events, things like that are coming through, are they anchored or are they going to be flying around everywhere? Those are definitely going to be some considerations to have. Security, crowd management, traffic control, parking, all things to really kind of look at on how you're moving people, keeping them moving so that they don't get bunched up. As people um, as people get into a tightly populated area when it comes to density, where, people aren't maybe respecting personal space or it just gets a little crowded. Some people can get a lot of anxiety from that. They can feel a little claustrophobic. Even people that don't go that extreme still feel uncomfortable. And it really doesn't take a lot, I think, for some personalities to get offended by other people, and then the angriness can kind of come out. So we always want to make sure that there's enough space, I think, for managing the crowd that you're expecting, and that you're giving people a good 6 foot or so buffer when you're calculating out how many people are going to be in a square footage area. So you certainly could figure out what your square footage is going to be and then be able to take the expected population and try to give them about 6 foot of area around them to keep people happy. Um, Evacuations, we always want to be able to consider that, or if there's other places where we need to shelter people, like tornado shelters, things like that. Do we even have the capacity for that? If we don't, then that we're going to need time to be able to get people out of the area and get them home or someplace where they can be protected otherwise, and make sure that our thresholds are a lot less, um, or our reluctance anyway to cancel the event, close the event, are less if we just don't have a way of being able to protect people on site. You're going to need to give them the time to be able to leave and find protection when you're going to make that call. You wouldn't want to make it at the last minute. We need to consider the disabled or other people who need access control. Um, um, help being able to get around, especially during an emergency. We need to figure out, are there going to be anything that are going to be a barrier in their way, as they're leaving. And most areas are going to be ADA compliant, but sometimes during an emergency, that ADA compliance can be constrained a little bit by the crowd, and we just have to be considerate of how do we get people out that might be in wheelchairs or otherwise need a little more help. Pets as well. So if that's something that's allowed at your venue, we do have to think about what that's going to look like and what how we're going to manage that and other safety considerations that you come up that might be specific. Those other safety considerations are just things that you get a good team together, and that team, brainstorms and comes up with what those other safety considerations might be that you're going to look through. Some other things with that outdoors indoors thing that we may have to think about is how we try to restrict flow or how we try to move people toward our vendor spaces. Do we have fencing? Do we have walkways that are going to constrict or confine them if we did have an emergency and they need to get out? So we need to think about if we have hard, fencing that's like bicycle fencing where it's locked together. Do we have a few areas where there's breaks in that just in case we do need to open up and have more capacity to flow people away from that? Just think that through in your engineering and your design. Restrooms, do you have enough for people to be able to accommodate them? Do you have enough area for seating if there is seating? Stages and platforms are kind of a big one. We want to make sure that any of the weight capacities aren't exceeded on stages and platforms so that they don't collapse. If we're using bleachers or things like that to have people sit during an emergency, we want to make sure that we're not overloading the capacity for that so it doesn't collapse. And then our entrances, we want to make sure that those don't create a funnel. If people are panicked and they've got to rush out of an area, it's unfortunate, but some people really stop thinking and their rational mind is not working. And the only thing going through their brain is, I'm going to die and I got to get out of here or something like that. So that causes some types of people to like push and trample through. And if somebody were to fall and you've got that group mentality where everybody's trying to rush out of only one exit, then it creates those trampling events that are out there. So it's a major concern with any kind of event is that we have enough capacity to be able to evacuate people and to be able to push them and distribute them across the different exits that you have available to you so that we avoid that. And so those are just a lot of considerations that we may have on the layout as things are going on. Other emergency items, again, everything being well marked, having medical supplies that are out there, and even having people nearby that are able to use that are trained. So if there are particular vendors that maybe have that training for an AED, CPR, that advanced stuff, maybe their location is put near that. If you're able to use the resources that you have to be able to help out, or have other staff that is ready to go get that while others attend to the person who's in the medical emergency. Different fire extinguishers, knowing where our shelter locations are in case we do have to have severe weather holding. Temporary structures, as I talked about, big thing in events, mainly going to be in any kind of different temporary setup that you got out there where these tents are being erected, whether it's as big as what you see on the screen or some of the pop-up tents or climbing walls, things like that that are meant to attract people out there. They're going to have wind capacities, and then if you have platforms and things like that inside of it, you're going to have also weight capacities that are important to understand. There are some I mean, the manufacturer's probably going to have some of this in their documentation. If they don't, or you can't find it, then there are engineering documents that are out there and standards that you might be able to find for the different types of tents that are out there. The concern here is if people get under it, it's poorly constructed, or a wind event comes in, then they can get trapped underneath that. And some of these have some pretty substantial weight that can even come down, even though they're temporary structures. So it's really something to kind of be concerned about. Plus, people would panic, I think, if it were to start coming down. Um, Other things to consider would be, just different rules that you might have on anchoring tents, or even if you're able to, in the ground. If you're not, do they have to be sandbagged or at least somehow weighted down so that they don't fly out and either cause personal injury or property damage if you have a gust of wind that comes up. Some other security and crowd control, considerations would be how far away are people's cars? Are they walking some distance to be able to get to your event? That is going to have to be factored in if you need to quickly get them away from your event as well. So again, making some determinations on, do we cancel? Do we postpone our event? All of that is going to be based on the amount of time that it would take to remove people from the event and get them to safety. So that's a major consideration that you need to have is, where is that line that I draw on how early or late, I guess, do we just pull the plug and say we're going to evacuate this area because we have an impending storm coming or something like that. You don't want to wait till the last minute because then people aren't going to have enough time to be able to leave the event. Do you have parking attendants, people to help with safety around that area where they're parking? Are they trained? Do they know what they're doing? Do they know their objectives of what they're trying to do? Not only to keep it orderly as people are coming in, but if you did have to evacuate and remove people from the area, um, do they know how to be able to ensure that they don't really have a traffic jam or trying to mitigate that the best that they can to be able to get people out of that area? If you have any other known threats for that area, if you have security concerns, crime is in the area, that might be other things that you consider for your plan. And then, as always, if there are things that just don't seem right, that are unsafe, suspicious, those are things that you definitely want to be reporting to the authorities, law enforcement, for their investigations, and to be able to be able to mitigate any harm that could come from a criminal actor that is in the area. So we want to think about that from a security standpoint, um, on all types of events that we have where people in number come together in a confined area. Evacuation, like we had talked about before, kind of knowing the routes. We've seen incidents in the past where just because everybody's funneled into a single entry, if you go to a theater or something like that, usually everybody's coming in the same door. And in their mind, psychologically, that's often where they think the exit is. Most people, are very comfortable with leaving the way that they came in. They may not consider during an emergency some of these other routes and exits that are available for them. And if they're blocked, then that's going to signal to them not to go that way. So we've got to be very careful to know what the routes are going to be and how to be able to distribute people uh, to those different evacuation routes. If you're using sheltering instead of evacuation, then you've got to make sure that you know where they are and that there's going to be enough room for people to be able to go in there. You don't really want to be playing duck, duck, goose with a tornado shelter and having, those last few people not be able to get into that room and say, sorry about your luck. So we want to make sure there's enough capacity for that. Some other considerations for the disabled. We want to make sure that they're considered in our planning effort. And again, the big thing for them is that they're really going to just need some time and extra assistance. Usually they're bringing their people that are helping them, their family or uh, people that are going to be helping them. But one thing really to consider would be not only that egress and making sure that they have the ability of being able to have a barrier-free exit, but it's also to then estimate the added time that they're going to need to be able to get out and evacuate. Other things that are out there, you've got health standards, you've got trip fall hazards with power cords or drains or things like that that are potentially going to cause a water hazard with maybe your temporary power conditions and cords. So you want to make sure that those aren't the connections aren't just laying along a curb where the water is going to go if you do have a rain event and create an electrical hazard. Different trash conditions, poorly stacked up supplies, or things that could tip over on people, unguarded equipment. And really, at the end of the day, you just have to plan for anything that could go wrong, to go wrong, and then uh, basically luck is going to favor the prepared. You're going to put in all this effort to make these plans, to make a good preparedness plan, and never use it. And that usually is what happens is after the event, we're like, man, we put in a lot of time and effort, didn't use the plan. Don't be disappointed with that because if you wouldn't have put the plan together, it would have happened and you would have been unprepared. We talked about the NOAA guidance that's out there. The main thing with the weather is making sure that you have somebody that is monitoring. This is a really good program that we've put together for many years where we have weather watchers that are just basically, and you don't have to have any special training, but somebody who's designated to watch the weather, especially if the forecast is indicating that you have some likelihood for severe weather. Make sure that somebody has the ability of being able to get warnings and watches and that you're really kind of keeping an eye on it. And one of the things with the weather watchers, usually we want to brief them ahead of time and say, hey, if the storm gets to this line indicating that it'll be here in a half hour or an hour, whatever your evacuation time estimate was going to be, then we want to know at that red line, and if it's going to take us an hour to get people out of there due to extremely severe weather, we want to make sure that when the weather is an hour away we make that call. We don't want to know that we're going to need an hour to evacuate everybody and make the call only 15 minutes before because people are going to get stuck in it. Some other tips would be being prepared for medical emergencies. You know all too well that you're going to have heat injuries in the summer. You're going to have the different things that happen where people trip, and you're going to have those types of things. You're going to have folks that maybe have cardiac issues, and that just happens to be the time as they're exerting themselves walking around that's going to manifest. So, thinking about getting some training with Red Cross or American Heart Association, wherever training for CPR, first aid is given in your area, really good consideration to have. For fire, thinking about maybe partnering with your fire department even. They love to do training for people with fire extinguishers to be able to learn how to use them. Just a couple of acronyms that are up on the screen. The RACE acronym kind of tells you how to respond to an event where we think about our priorities of rescuing people first, activating the alert system and calling for help, containing the area to either try to remove fuels or things that can burn away from the fire, getting people away from it, and then possibly extinguishing or evacuating that area. PASS is another acronym that just kind of gives us the instructions for how to use the fire extinguisher, pulling the pin, aiming it, squeezing the lever, and sweeping it from side to side until it gets extinguished. Fire departments love to give that type of training. Get with your local fire department to see if they offer that. And then for your active shooter events, we want to be thinking about run, hide, fight. And basically, that's going to be based on the proximity to the threat that is there. So if you're really close to the threat and you don't have an opportunity to be able to run or find a place to be able to barricade yourself, I really hate that picture in the middle. I need to get rid of it where they're just hiding under a table. That doesn't work. You need to get to an area that you can lock, you can barricade, and you can keep the threat away from you. So hiding in itself is actually a bad strategy. You want to be able to get somewhere where you can block, the door in and keep them away from you. But you may have to fight as a last resort because the threat is so close to you that you don't have those other options available to you. Vehicle rammings have become a big thing as well in outdoor events. So looking at ways to make sure that not only people that are trying to cause harm to your community, but even we've seen things where we've had elderly drivers that have gone confused and have figured out how to like get into the streetscape. We've had drunk drivers even that have went through there. They have no intent to hurt anybody, but it's something that ends up happening. Or then we do have our mind th thought against these really, evil people out there that do want to hurt people that we've got to consider. So, working with law enforcement, road departments, or commissions to figure out the best way to block off, roadways and places where vehicles could get to is a big thing. Then you have your lost children plans, vulnerable adults, things like that we need to consider. How do we collect them? How do we have a meeting point? How do we get the information out there so that we can reunite, reconnect them to an adult? If we can't find one, have we worked out maybe an agreement with our Department of Health and Human Services, who does child protection services, to be able to refer the child to their care until they can find that adult. That's talking about like an hour or something like that after. You wouldn't want to call them right away. Um, and then basically, we're just looking at, again, and recap, identifying your highest hazards. You guys had collected a few of them in the chat. Um, Getting a team together to figure out which are the ones that we're going to put a plan together for. And then you're going to develop those plans to prevent or prepare or manage your risk. Don't be complacent, and then make sure that you know when you're going to have that call off, postponement procedure, who has the authority to make that decision, and then maintain a communication system to be able to get that out there. And then finally, you're going to want to communicate that out, train it to your people, and maybe even do some walkthroughs at some point if you have a new procedure, new plan in place, just to make sure that it's going to work for everybody. So I did butt right up to the 40 minutes or so I think that I had on the agenda. But if there are any questions, I think we have a few moments. If you're shy and you don't want to ask your question here, my email address for the association's up on the screen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rocky. I think if anyone has like a burning question, we could maybe do one. And if not, I would say maybe put your question in the chat and then maybe Rocky can kind of help answer there. So any burning questions about emergency preparedness? Right. If not, like I said, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But otherwise, we're going to keep going. So I am going to turn it over now to Ashley from the MIFMA team. And Ashley's going to talk to us a bit about insurance for farmers markets and for vendors.
All right, great. Can everybody see my slides okay? They transferred? Okay. Thank you, Jenny. For those who haven't met me yet, just my name's Ashley Wenger. I'm a program director for the Michigan Farmers Market Association, and at MIFMA, I lead our produce prescription work, which you're going to hear more about on Monday. But I've been with MIFMA for about 4 years now, and before I joined MIFMA, I was a market manager for several markets out in the Boston area. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about a specific risk management tool, and that is insurance for markets and your farmers and vendors. And I'll say, well, I realize insurance is probably not the most exciting topic to be listening about on a Wednesday night. Please do bear with me because it is a very important topic and an incredibly valuable tool to help markets manage their risk. So just to start really quick with a disclaimer that this is an educational presentation that is intended to offer you resources, and I am not qualified to give legal advice, and I would not on behalf of MIFMA, nor does MIFMA endorse any particular insurance provider or policy. So the presentation tonight is really solely for educational purposes and encourage you all to consult your own insurance providers and or legal counsel if you have access to it when making any decisions about your market and your specific situations. All right, so when we talk about insurance, we're really talking about another tool for risk management. The Farmers Market Legal Toolkit through the Center for Agricultural and Food Systems out of the Vermont Law School is a phenomenal toolkit that I encourage you all to explore, and I'll share a direct link to it in the chat at the end of this presentation. But the toolkit goes through various different legal scenarios and risk management tools for farmers markets and also breaks common risks markets face into a couple different categories. The first one, which you're most likely familiar with, and we heard a lot about already today from Rocky, is injuries to people and damage to property. There's legal risk due to food-related illnesses that could occur. You have ADA compliance, which Rocky also touched on. So that's your disability compliance, ensuring that people with a range of abilities can participate and or shop at your market. And then there's also the risk with managing relationships. As market managers, we all manage all sorts of relationships. There's vendor relationships that you all navigate, community partner relationships, sponsors, and so forth. And then another example could be relationships with the host site. According to the census that MIFMA conducted back in 2021, about 60% of census markets operated on property owned by an entity other than the market itself. So renting or leasing property can present a risk for a market. And then finally, there's risk from employment and labor laws as well. So while a market could experience years of operation without an incident, unexpected events and accidents can happen anywhere. The slideshow just shows some of the specific examples of risks farmers markets take on, many which Rocky just pointed out, those related to weather, injuries to individuals, such as a shopper trips over a stake in the ground used to weigh down a tent and causes injury to their leg. A vendor gets bit by an animal at the market. You have medical emergencies. I saw people mention in the chat about the heat, well, a customer passing out from the heat on a hot day, or incidents of violence or other unusual circumstances, bomb threats, contagious disease, civil unrest, etc. Then there are common liability risks, which can include product liabilities. So if there's an outbreak of foodborne illness or a topical product that causes an allergic reaction or is unsafe or improperly labeled in some way. There's, of course, transportation-related liabilities. You have grievances or issues from vendors. A vendor may become disgruntled by market management decisions or violate the market rules, which could escalate into legal or market reputation damaging incidents. And then another common liability is the safety of the market infrastructure like tents. And I know that picture that Rocky showed with the tent over the car is was my worst nightmare as a market manager. I've seen my fair share of tents fly when they're not weighted properly. So you can see, and as we've heard tonight, farmers markets face legal risk from a wide variety of sources. However, I'll say understanding the source and general nature of these legal risks is really the first step in managing them. So generally, when we're talking about risks, they're things that are insurable and that we can protect our market against. Most often, accidents and incidents like those described are resolved without legal conflict. However, when the issue does escalate into a lawsuit and someone sues the market, the financial needs can wreak havoc on that market. So insurance can be an incredibly valuable tool to manage these risks and protect a market against lawsuits. According to that farmers market legal toolkit, good insurance provides farmers markets with an attorney in the event the market is sued. So the farmers market has access to the expertise necessary to defend against the lawsuit. It provides the markets with a source of funds to pay covered legal liabilities if they materialize, and a partner in identifying and managing sources of risk at the market itself. Again, NIFMA is here to advise you to find someone qualified that you can work with, who can help you understand what your risks are given your space, your policies that your market has, the people that's involved in your market, and really how to best protect your market and make sure you can still continue to serve your community. However, there are limits to what each policy provides, so it's important to understand, what you're covered for and what you're not covered for. When discussing insurance for marketplaces, there's a lot of different types of insurance policies that we can talk about depending on the market's needs and risks. Commercial general liability insurance covers a wide range of some of the most common incidents at the market. Having commercial general liability insurance is one of the policies that NIFMA recommends that all marketplaces have. Generally speaking, liability insurance covers claims of personal injury or property damage, so claims when someone sues the market. Therefore, depending on the policy and type of riders that are included, liability policies can provide legal and financial protection against certain personal injury claims from shoppers, volunteers, anyone covered on your workers' comp policy, many weather-related damages to people or property, and then also it can cover product liability insurance as well, if that's included in your policy. Certain product grievances could be covered. So while liability insurance is a policy for all things related to property damage and personal injury, again, there's limitations to what is covered. So depending on your market's needs, you might want to consider other types of insurances as well. There's workers' compensation, which is required for most businesses under state law. Workers' compensation covers all employees for injuries that occur on the job. It's important to mention that most policies don't cover your volunteers, though. So if you're not already, encourage you to either look at a rider that would include volunteers in your policy, or consider an injury waiver if you're not already using one for volunteers at your market. Other considerations include property insurance. If you own valuable pieces of property, such as a storage trailer, or you own the property or structure that your marketplace takes place in, you'll want to consider insuring those as well. You have auto insurance for any market-owned vehicles. And then there's director and officers. I think it's director and operators. That's what I have on my slide. D&O insurance that helps protect personal assets of the people making decisions and in charge of the market in the event they are sued for wrongful acts in managing the company. There's employment practices liability insurance as well. If your market is lucky enough to have its own employees, then you want to make sure you are protecting yourself against liability in your employment hiring practices, such as sexual harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination claims by employees, etc. So this is just a quick overview of some of the various insurance options. Again, depending on what your market risks and needs are, you might want to consider carrying various different types of policies. All right, so when shopping around for policies, there's a few components to look for. And this circles back kind of what I shared earlier around what makes up a good policy. And that's an attorney in the event the market's sued. So you'll want to be sure to ask about legal advisement. That the policy provides financial support or a source of funds to pay those covered legal liabilities when a claim is processed. And finally, that there'll be a partner in identifying and managing sources of risk. Good insurance should provide markets with a knowledgeable representative that you can work with to identify and manage your risks. So it's important to work with a provider who understands farmers markets, because not all do. And they're willing to take the time to understand kind of what makes your market unique to make sure your specific market needs are incorporated into your policy. So talk with your agent, find out what type of incidents are covered by your policy, who at your market is covered, and what the policy will cover both financially and legally per each event. All right. So I just want to talk about sponsoring organizations really quick. Um, a really important part of finding the correct policy or set of policies will be working with your sponsoring organization if you have one. It's very likely that if you do have a sponsoring organization for your market, then they probably already have a liability insurance policy. Therefore, work with them and their insurance provider to ensure that your market's needs are covered under that existing policy. A few examples to look out for could include you'll want to discuss how your sponsoring organization considers your market to be part of their overall work in a legal sense. Really understand how your market's being protected on their policy. So, for example, if you're considered a special event under your sponsoring organization, then you might want to look into a special event rider that's attached to their policy that lays out the purpose of your market and any additional risks that your market incurs that the organization as a whole might not have considered under their policies. Another good question is to ask about locations. Is your market's location included in your sponsoring organization's liability policy? Very often, we all know our market's location is not the same address as our sponsoring organization's physical address or mailing address. So it's important to ensure that the policy lists locations covered in your market's location as one of those. And then a final example is that you'll want to discuss who's covered under your sponsoring organization's policy. This may be especially important if you're considered an independent contractor, as independent contractors can be sometimes seen as separate businesses to the farmers market and therefore aren't always covered under a market's liability or workers' comp policy. You'll just want to make sure to see if you're covered, and if you're not covered, what options you might have to make sure that you pursue coverage for yourself. So work with your sponsoring organization, have a good relationship with them, and know who in their organization handles things like insurance is really important. All right, so what else is important to think about with insurance? It's important to have layers of protection, including not only that the market has insurance, but your vendors do as well. In your market policies, NIFMA considers it important to include requirements that your vendors have commercial general liability protection to minimize that exposure to financial risk. By requiring that your vendors carry insurance, the market is also better protected because the vendor will also have a policy providing legal expertise and a source of financial funds if the vendor is found liable. And I'll say the reality is that oftentimes multiple parties can be brought into a lawsuit. So if a shopper trips on a tent stake being used by a vendor and then, seeks medical attention, and the shopper or the shopper's insurance company may file a lawsuit to recover from those injuries. While it might have been the vendor's stake, the farmer's market could also be brought into the claim because they didn't stop the vendor from, using that tent stake in the first place, for example. Just really kind of stresses the need that both the vendor and the market need insurance. And I'll say if the vendor's not covered, then those costs and liabilities could fall fully on the market itself, and the market could be liable for all damages incurred by a vendor. So it is recommended that vendors have a minimum of $1 million in general liability coverage and $1 million in product liability coverage. Vendor policies can come in different types of forms. They could have commercial policy, they could have a farm policy, but regardless of the policy type, you're going to want to make sure they have the coverage that your market requires in its policies. And then there's a few ways when considering how to document that market vendor relationship. One best practice when requiring your vendors to carry insurance is to have the vendors list the market as a certificate holder on their policy. And what this means is it ensures that if there's any changes to their policy, including a cancellation of their policy, that you would be communicated to as a certificate holder in that case. An additional option that you might want to consider is adding an additional insured to your policy or having vendors add the market as an additional insured. Generally, adding an organization as an additional insured extends the policy's coverage to that entity. But as you might expect, adding additional insureds can incur additional costs. So that's something you're going to want to keep in mind. And then Last resort, I'll say, is a waiver that can be used to address liability. However, I do want to, provide a big warning that um, waivers can be tricky as the verbiage you use is extremely important on whether that waiver will hold up in court. So if you're using any sort of waivers, I would highly suggest to have legal counsel review it if you do have access to it to ensure that you are covered. I'll note one thing that MIFMA uses is for some Amish populations that attend our farmers market at the Capitol, insurance requirements may not be possible. So we do make an exception for Amish vendors, but we do require that a community agreement from the Amish church is provided that states that they'll assume full liability for the vendor being at the market. All right. So here's just an example of the language that MIFMA includes in our market policies for our vendors at farmers market at the Capitol. So it states in our policies that vendors must provide proof of legal liability and product liability insurance, each with a minimum of 1 million in coverage per incident, naming MIFMA as a certificate holder or additional insured on their existing policy. A copy of the vendor's insurance certificate of insurance must be received by MIFMA by July. And then we do note that if the business does not meet the insurance requirements, to contact us to discuss what options might be available to them. And I'll say the certificate of insurance, COI, if you're not familiar with it, it's a one-page document issued by insurance companies that serve as proof of an active insurance policy. It summarizes like key details, so your coverage types, your policy limits, effective dates, making sure that the policy is actually active, and the insured party's name. So you'll want to ask your vendors to see that certificate of insurance to review their policy. And then before closing, I just want to remind folks that insurance is just one component of legal risk management for your farmers market. So even though many of the needs outlined here so far today are insurable, encourage you to look into building the most sound possible insurance policy for your market, as there's no one magic policy that can protect you against everything. But there's also other important risk management tools as well. In addition to what Rocky brought up in his presentation about preparing, there's also, tools such as your market governance. So choosing the most appropriate business entity can protect personal assets from market's liabilities. Creating and enforcing market policies to help promote a safe market environment and prevent and minimize risk or conflict in the future. Um, and then also to keeping solid records, such as vendor and host site agreements, records of safety procedures and business records, all create a paper trail that supports accountability and can serve as legal evidence. So really, it's important to consider, all of these elements when you're building out your market and making it a safe place. And I'll say the goal of liability insurance should be to never have to use it, but there's a lot of protection that insurance can offer, but it's something that you want to have to come to for the last resort. Um, so with that, I just want to end with a couple of resources that I can also throw in the chat. The first is that Farmers Market Legal Toolkit I mentioned. It really is an excellent resource and goes into much more detail than what I covered today. Some of my favorite parts of the toolkit is how they describe various insurance options available to farmers markets. There's also a section of questions to ask insurance agents when if you are shopping for a policy, really helping to ensure that you're obtaining a policy that's best for your market. And then I talked about the certificate of insurances to require from your vendor. I'll put a link in the chat, but Campbell Risk Management has a great resource where it lays out how to read that certificate of insurance, which may be helpful when you're reviewing your own policy or reviewing the policy of your vendors. And so that, I think, brings me to the end, Jenny. So I'll add those links in the chat, but I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Again, I think we have time for maybe one question. So, if anyone has, oh, we have one in the chat, which is great. Is it common to consider cyber or information insurance? We handle a lot of sensitive information.
Um, I think some policies will have that included in Not in like a general liability insurance, but I believe like MIFMA, we have I think a rider for some level of cyber security insurance. But that is probably something that's very different policy to policy. So would ask your insurance policy representative if that's something that's included or not.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. Well, in the interest of time, I will again encourage you if you have questions about insurance to pop them in the chat, so Ashley can respond to them directly. But for the last chunk of tonight's webinar, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Communications, Haley, who is going to chat with us about how we communicate health risks and emergencies to the public.
Thank you for the introduction, Jenny, and thank you, Ashley and Rocky, for all the information you shared as well. Just as Ashley said, as a reminder, we here at MIFMA are a team of great, wonderful individuals who are not lawyers and do not provide you with legal advice on behalf of me or behalf on MIFMA. We've done a lot of listening tonight, so I'd love to hear a little bit whether folks want to go off mute or pop in the chat. When your market has good news or an exciting update, how would you share that information? Like what channels would you use? Who would you want to tell? I want to hear it.
We use our Facebook page. Also, my boss, she's very active. She does a lot of TV interviews. And then we also have a weekly radio interview during our peak season.
Great. Thank you, Barb. Anybody else?
We just announced a rebrand. We did that in person as we are the chamber who owns and runs the farmers market. So we have a monthly, it's called Wake Up Midland. We have about 300 people that come on a Friday morning. And so we announced it there. There was a press release. It was on all 2 or 3 of our social media, and it was on our website.
Awesome. I did see that rebrand from the farmers market. Emily looks great. And it means that your efforts are working. So why are we talking about good and exciting things at the market when we are here to talk about communicating emergencies? And it's because all of the channels and methods that you would use and that we mentioned today are important tools that we can utilize if and when an emergency occurs. We spent a lot of time on possible emergencies at the farmers market today. That could look like anything from an outbreak of a foodborne illness or spread of contagious disease, severe weather, damage to property. Those pretty much everything on this list here is something that has happened at a farmers market in the last couple of years in Michigan or the Midwest. In the case of an emergency or any of those things that we've talked about, it is your responsibility as the market manager to communicate the news to your market staff, vendors, volunteers, and customers. Do not wait a significant amount of time before sharing the news with your market audience, because the longer you wait to share information, the greater for risk for harm and other negative impacts can be. So when we are talking about these emergencies, we want to use clear, concise language. We want people who are just skimming through on their phone to be able to understand right away what's happening. You want to apologize and offer assistance. Where should people go if they were affected? What can they do? And be really specific about who and what is impacted. We'll get into an example in a little bit here, but is it every potato sold at your market all season is affected? Or is it just one subcategory of fingerling potatoes from one vendor sold on one day has a contamination issue? You want to make people understand very thoroughly. You also want to focus on how you're addressing the situation. So you can't prevent what has already happened, but you can work to make a stronger future for your market and prevent similar incidents from happening again. Be reassuring. Your market is a safe place for your community to come together and spend time. Um, and you want it to remain that way. Um, and with folks who have any questions, you want to make a clear place for you, or for your shoppers, excuse me, of where those should be directed. Likely that's going to be you as the market manager. So sharing a direct phone line, email, or other way to get in contact with you is a great thing to include. Looking at real life of something that has happened at a Michigan market in the last few years. In October of 2022, MDARD released a consumer advisory urging the disposal of all produce products from country farms or any goods containing them. So when MDARD releases a consumer advisory, they follow a pretty similar format. It says exactly what the situation is, that there was contamination of fresh produce, how the problem was discovered. So in this instance, it was during a routine produce safety inspection. MDARD staff noticed that there was a concern with raw, untreated human waste around the area where these products were being grown. Who has been affected? Luckily, in this instance, at the time of the publishing of the advisory, no illness has been reported, but they did include specific symptoms of what to look for. Loss of appetite, weakness, jaundice, other very specific symptoms that folks would want to seek medical advice for if they think they were affected. They include every location where those products were sold. So in this instance, there were 11 different stores, some with multiple locations that were affected. And you can see there's a pretty wide spread here, all the way from Traverse City, Canton, South Lyon. So having those all included, so you're not guessing, oh, is it Country Farms with a K that sold my produce? Like, I know sometimes farmers have similar names, but again, being very detailed. MDARD will include what corrective action they're taking. So they seize the products and are working with the farmer and farm to make it safe for produce and products grown in the future. And exactly where to go if they have questions or concerns, exactly who and where and how to call someone at MDARD and to contact the place where they bought the products in order to receive a refund or other information. Of the 10 businesses that were listed, 2 made public statements on their social media accounts. That was the Ypsilanti Food Co-op and Greener Pastures Market. Quick disclaimer that that doesn't necessarily mean that every other market didn't do anything. It was just at the time of the creation of this presentation, I was no longer able to find any evidence of those. They could have been deleted. They could have just not like tagged it in a way that I could find, or it could be visible to just their audience. So I'm not slamming anybody else on that list there for not making a statement or doing anything wrong. The Ypsilanti Food Co-op, I thought, is a pretty strong example of what to look for in a post-emergency communication. So they start off strong with an apology and corrective action. So immediately they started sanitizing and cleaning any area of their store where the product could have come in contact with. Clean, sanitized, all that jazz. They name exactly which products were affected. So I'm sure at that time this co-op had just a beautiful array of vegetables, but only their heirloom tomatoes, some squash, and zucchini were the things that were affected, and that they had not been there in the last week or so. So even though it would be unlikely that any of the affected products had been purchased in the recent past, still being very clear about what they were. It was posted within 1 day of the release of MDARD's consumer advisory. In our experience here at MIFMA, those affected sites may or may not receive notice before the official publication of the consumer advisory. They apologized for not being quicker with a post because they were prioritizing the physical sanitation of their space, but within 24 hours is still a pretty darn good turnaround for something like this. And then they go on to share the full consumer advisory from MDARD and other information for their shoppers specifically, exactly who to contact and how to get in touch with them. So this is a great example that I've come back to year after year because it's so thorough. And unfortunately, something that they had to do. Greener Pastures Market also checked a lot of the boxes of the list that we talked about. So again, they posted within 24 hours of the consumer advisory being released. They shared their corrective action, which was to dispose of all the products and that they would not be working with them in the future, as well as, again, the specific products that they had. So zucchini, one kind of cherry tomatoes, and one type of squash. So being very clear to their customers about what happened, that they hadn't used it in any of their hot prepared foods, and that they had only sold 3 pints of tomatoes and 4 single zucchini. So a very small number of customers were affected. They also did share and link to the full consumer advisory from MDARD. Just looking at some other additional incidents that have happened in Michigan to get a good idea of what other things we might see from our neighbors in MDARD. In 2024, there was a consumer advisory about a popular cheese vendor because of potential health risk. We're not going to go through that full example, but it's linked in the presentation that you'll receive after the event today. And in 2023, MDARD published a consumer advisory regarding unsolicited package of seeds coming in the mail. So while those were not physically distributed at a farmer's market, we know farmers use a lot of seeds. We know that shoppers often are fans of gardening, growing things. So something that's related to the sector, even though it didn't physically take place at a market. Now, when we look at emergency communications, we want to look at both proactive and reactive strategies. So proactive strategies, that's what we do before an emergency happens to decrease the likelihood of it happening and to minimize any potential for harm. So things like our policies and procedures and our vendor agreements, signage at the market, things like that. While reactive strategies looks like more what we just looked at the examples for, that's what we do after a crisis to inform our audiences, recover, and regain trust from our community. Some examples of proactive risk management are being really clear about roles and responsibilities of those at the market. So just knowing who can make decisions about the market. Are you, as the market manager, allowed to be like a one-man show and cancel the market if there's severe weather anticipated? Or does your board of directors have to vote on it? Does your sponsoring organization have to okay it? Knowing the chain of command there. Even if you are unreachable or incapacitated, whether that is related to the emergency at hand, or you just happen to be on a lovely hot air balloon trip the one day something happens at your market. It always seems to go that way with markets in Michigan. In your absence, is the person who's the market manager that day allowed to make those decisions, or is it somebody else at the organization? Looking at organizations that have bigger teams, whose responsibility is it to distribute messages after an incident or the news beforehand? So if you are lucky enough to have a communications person or a media person on your team, do they draft it and you publish it? Do you write it and they publish it? Just understanding the order of command and what needs to happen. And where is your vendor and staff contact information stored? Who has access to it? It's great if you have a perfect phone tree in your private Google Documents on your personal laptop. But if you forget your computer at home that day, or it gets caught in the tornado, whatever, who has access to it besides you? And where else is it shared? Is it stored on like a cloud service? Things like that. We also look at our policies and procedures. What is included in your vendor agreements? Scripts or templates for different scenarios. Are those things that you can draft ahead of time, so you just have to pop in a few details and can respond faster? Completing and maintaining an emergency flip chart, which is our free MIFMA resource that we'll get into a little bit. Having clear policies for your shoppers in your market location. Are pets allowed? Is that something you even have the determination to make, or is that the decision of somebody else or some other organization? Your lease agreement, what does it say? Who's in charge of what? And having thought out procedures of what are acceptable reasons for the market to be canceled completely or to close early or alter your operating hours. Is it a certain temperature? Is it a certain severe weather warning? Just being really clear about what that looks like ahead of time so you're not scrambling in the moment. Some general best practices of things we want to make sure we include. Requiring tent weights for tents at all times. There's no setting up the tent and then, oh, I have to run to my car half a mile away to go get my weights and run them back. And it'll just be unweighted and alone in the meantime. No, that's unacceptable. And having that in your vendor procedures. Having policies for your shoppers, especially about things like dogs and pets. That's a really common problem, unfortunately, that we've seen recently. Having that information easily available anywhere, anyone's going to look for any information about your market. So your market's website and newsletters you distribute every week, on signs at the market. There's a couple examples on the next slide too, that you can kind of customize and use as inspiration to match the tone and brand of your market. And again, clarifying who is responsible for physical location maintenance in your lease agreement. If a tree falls on your beautiful permanent market structure, do you call the tree guy to have it come taken away? Is that something that a property manager or other owner has to do? I know in the chat earlier, someone said that there were some pavers that folks trip over pretty regularly. Is that a problem? Can you remove those, or do you have to work with your city or other organization that's in charge of that space? Just things to consider ahead of time, again, before someone falls and breaks a leg on one of those pavers. And it is still okay to have humor or be able to use the voice of your market. So for a market that maybe is a little more casual or a little bit more community oriented, something like the no smoking, no dogs, absolutely no smoking dogs could be appropriate, including other animals besides dogs and cats, lizards, chickens, things like that. Or again, depending on the tone of your market, just a very clear no pets, no fuss, no frills, exactly what's allowed and what's not. There's no one right way to convey that information. But again, being thoughtful so that it fits the kind of personality of your market and your community so it can be the most effective. A couple more general best practices, having language drafted ahead of time for common scenarios. If you know your market is located in a floodplain and you know at least a handful of times per summer you're going to have to close your market because of predicted rainfall or things like that, having a script ahead of time that you can just copy and paste from a Google Doc into your newsletter, your social media, things like that, ahead of time will save so much time in the moment, especially when you might be frazzled about all the other phone calls you have to make or all the other changes that you have to do. And when sharing some of this more time-sensitive information, getting the most mileage out of the posts that you do make. So pinning posts on your social media. So that's the first thing that people see when they go to your Facebook page that day. Sharing those posts to your stories. So to get a little extra visibility, I know I look at personally way more of my friends' stories on Instagram than I do like my actual feed. Um, Again, it all comes down to making it as easy as possible for people to get the information they need about your market, whether that is to stay safe or just have a good shopping experience. Um, Now that everybody is probably a little uncomfortable and a little freaked out about all the work that there is to do, MIFMA has plenty of resources available to help make things a little bit easier. So the first and most important is that flip chart of emergency procedures that has come up a couple times today. You could forget everything else you learned today, but if you go download and print this out and have it at your market, that's still a success to me. We encourage all markets to fill out that tool and keep a physical copy at the market at all times. It's free, it's on our website, it's formatted to print easily at home or cheaply at an office supply store like Staples. It's all set up in there for you. Things that are included there are incident report forms, so you can maintain the institutional knowledge if something does unfortunately happen. Details you want to consider for emergency reporting. Get the facts, write them down, exactly what happened. So there's no guessing, there's no forgetting, things like that. And it covers all of the topics here. I think virtually all of that we've touched on today. Everything from a robbery description report to what to do in the event of bloodborne pathogens. Things that we hope never happen, but we feel a little bit more empowered because we're prepared for them if the 1 in a million chance does happen. We also have a best practices for farmers market operations to protect public health and safety. So more of those proactive solutions. This resource was born out of our COVID-19 2020 recommendations for farmers markets. But what we found is most of that information are just things that are blanket a good idea. Providing hand washing locations at your market, especially if you have a lot of hot prepared food vendors of things that people are going to eat on site. Disinfecting things like tokens and point of sale devices, doorknobs, things like that, every customer is going to touch. Instructions for sampling, whether that's coming from your vendors or an event that you as the market are hosting. All sorts of good information. It's not terribly long. It's a good one to print out and have in your legacy binder. Speaking of that legacy binder, a few more things that you can fill out and have on hand. This emergency and community resources. So if your market does not have a physical address, in the moment, you may not recall exactly how to describe where it is, but having that recorded and ready to go so you or a volunteer or other staff member can reference it easily is the way to go. If you have any special or specific contacts at anyone for the police department, fire department, things like that, as well as just some information about when it's appropriate to call 911. We also have a emergency contact list that you can either print out and fill out with a pencil or pen at the market, or fill in like by typing in the text boxes online. Good thing at the beginning of the season to get taken care of and filed away. Our friends at the national level also have a risks and record keeping tool available as part of that farmers market legal toolkit. Some of it is a little duplicative of things that MIFMA has, but other things like example scripts, food safety trainings, things like that, are all part of a good proactive risk management. I know we have just about 5 minutes left here, barely any time, but I would love to hear, has your market ever dealt with an emergency? Is there anything that you think went really well about how you or your staff reacted? And maybe what did you learn that you need to improve for next time? I see someone brought a bird to the market. Uh, that could be an emergency, depending on the size and type of the bird, certainly. Lizard. Why are all these people bringing lizards to the market? That I hear that all the time. Um, Tornado watch and warning this season. Uh, yeah, I know even in Lansing, we got a tornado here last year, and I got to practice some home emergency procedures that I had not got to practice before. Um, Sat over us for 45 minutes. Yeah, so not that we ever want to practice having an emergency and that we have to live through it. All great examples. Not seeing anything else in the chat. So Jenny, I think I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Well, we all know that we at MIFMA got to enact our emergency procedures for the first time. We remember the photo I shared at our in-person sessions. A lovely little thunderstorm. But yeah, I can't stress enough how helpful it is to have a process to turn to when you're like your body's reaction is like fight or flight and you start to panic. So it seems like a lot of work, but like Rocky said at the beginning today, you'll probably get to the end of the season and be like, wow, we did all that work and we never used this. But I promise the one time that you do use it, you're going to be thankful that you put all that work in. Okay, we have just about 4 minutes left, so I'm gonna try to talk slowly at the end here. So if there's any last minute questions, you can pop them into the chat. But I do just want to thank Rocky, Ashley, and Haley for being here with us tonight to talk through a lot of stuff that is maybe uncomfortable and not so fun to listen to, but is super important to make sure that we are maintaining a safe environment at our markets. I think that is all I have. Reminder, if you're part of the full program, to take your quiz and do any assignments that are coming up. I'm sure you probably have some that are due later this week. I think there's one due each Sunday. If you are not part of the full program, an email will go out with all of the resources, slides, and a link to the recording tomorrow. And otherwise, we will see everyone next week on Monday, February 2nd, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. to talk about food assistance benefits. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everyone.